is this going to keep going? I mean, we were wondering if it might begin to fade by now, but it looks like companies are still doing it. I mean, it's a lot of people.
I just, for each of those companies, I mean, we don't have enough time to do it right now, but I would say, how many people did they hire during the pandemic? And if the appetite for these products is back where it was in 2019, let's say, how do you keep that many more people, right? If you grew by 30% and you cut 10%, you still have a lot of extra workers that you didn't have 2.5 years ago. And so maybe you do need another round if you're finding that the appetite is going back to those 2019 levels. I think this sort of digital future that people talked about didn't turn out to be true, because lo and behold, we started to go back to the movie theater and the gym and restaurants. And I just don't think companies really knew, because how could we during the pandemic, where they were going. And now they're not sure where they've landed. For some companies, it's been a softer landing than others. But for some, I think investors are demanding even more cost cutting, and we may well see more in the future.
And these companies have grown despite all the layoffs. I'm reminded of when the dot-com bubble burst. Everyone said, oh, thousands of companies have shuttered, and this is going to be a massive setback for the internet and e-commerce and all that. And then, later on, we look back at the numbers, and that world, the world of internet commerce, didn't miss a step. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, March 10th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman, technology reporter for NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove. And our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Okay, so word on the street this week. It may have happened after we recorded. We're recording a little bit early because we're about to get inundated with another atmospheric river in Northern California. So we may be underwater by the time you hear this. Word on the street is Meta's going to do another layoff of thousands of employees.
Yeah, this is interesting. It was a report.
And I know some employees that have actually heard it internally. So
that's what they're saying. And Bloomberg was the first to report that. Nothing from Facebook yet, no warrant filing or anything like that. But this is their year of efficiency. And it's interesting for Facebook. It's been a while since anything went right. I mean, they've been spending on the metaverse. Investors hated that. They've been pilloried in the press for privacy issues. Obviously, investors don't like that either. They laid off a bunch of people, and their stock price has pretty much doubled since January.
Laid off 11,000, and the stock was up. And even on the rumors of the layoff this week, the stock started climbing again.
Clearly, Facebook is playing to investors, and investors want, I don't know if efficiency is the right word, but they want cost cutting after all of the spending that was done on the metaverse, which even Mark Zuckerberg himself admits is A, not ready, and B, kind of a future project. Like, people aren't ready to go in there now. So the idea of getting advertising revenue on that, which is Facebook's, reason for existence, at least for the investors, is perhaps years away. Investors really got sick of hearing that, and they punished the stock. And then, Zuckerberg really brought things back by saying, we're going to curb spending on the metaverse for now, and we're going to lay off a whole bunch of people and just cut costs everywhere we can. And that's what investors wanted to hear.
So taking a larger perspective on all this, does this say good things about Meta or bad things about Meta? I mean, when they had the big layoff, it was like, well, they've been screwing everything up and blah, blah, blah. But then the stock went up, and it's now up like 190. And now they're doing it again, and the stock is continuing to climb. Does that say you were too successful, but you got too far out over your skis, and now you're doing the responsible thing? So actually, we are very optimistic about the company during this year of efficiency, to, in Zuckerberg's words.
I mean, I think they might be going and saying, we are now as optimistic as we used to be before you decided to change the focus to the metaverse, which is this giant question mark, both in terms of how many people are going to want to be there, and how much revenue the company will make. And so the optimism comes from Facebook admitting, hey, we're still a cash cow when it comes to Instagram and Facebook itself, and even WhatsApp, which is extremely successful. And going back to focus on those things is what investors wanted to hear, because for years and years, they've just made so much money as the social media leader, both in terms of numbers of people and advertising dollars coming in. And they're going back to that clearly and saying, okay, I'm not sure that we're going to give up on the metaverse, but we're not going to put all our eggs in that basket just because, A, people aren't excited about it. And again, it's just not pulling in any revenue for the company.
So you and I have both been fielding interviews and questions and all that for the last couple of months. Is Silicon Valley dying? Is this, all this bad news? Is this actually, has it actually been bad news? I mean, the people laid off, it's been bad news. But if the market's optimistic the way it was several years ago, that sounds like it's actually good news going on at the same time.
Well, I mean, look, like it took you a long time to ask that question, is good news or bad news? I think that is indicative of what's going on. There are still a lot of job openings, right? I mean, 1.9 jobs for every person looking for a job is open. That's a really strong economic indicator. Even as tech companies have laid off tens of thousands of workers, people are still working, wages are still fairly strong, so they're still spending, but that puts us in inflationary times. And all those Fed interest rate hikes have done only one thing, which is really, really raise interest rates. They haven't curbed inflation yet. So we have both high interest rates.
And they've admitted they blew it. They didn't do enough.
Well, and so we're likely to see more. We have mortgage rates up back to 7%. So we have really high rates and really high prices, not as high, but still pretty high prices because inflation is still with us. And so the concern, I think, is, hey, it's going to be tougher for tech companies to borrow money because of the interest rates. But also now that we know that these tech companies are chopping people and being more, quote unquote, efficient and cutting costs, that's dangerous going forward. So right now, the economy is really strong, but are we plateauing going forward? And I think people are concerned. And so there's this big question mark heading in. And that is why the stock market has fallen so far recently, because the stock market hates uncertainty.
Yeah. One little addition, it looks like Facebook is folding Messenger back in, which is kind of a retrograde move. I mean, that company always kind of moves everything outwards or keeps it at kind of at arm's length. And now taking one of the original, creations and bringing it back into the company. I don't know if that signals anything, sends a message. I don't know.
I think it signals that people are still using it, but that's no shade against WhatsApp because people still use that too. The fact is, these companies like WhatsApp and Instagram that Facebook bought have been tremendous successes for Facebook. They're really good at acquiring companies. As far as how good they are at building things from within, that's been a real mixed bag. And I think the metaverse is the latest. I mean, sure, they bought Oculus, but they're trying to build this whole world around it. And so far, that just hasn't hit.
But they've had Zuckerberg's had a genius of always skipping ahead on the zeitgeist, whatever the kids are going to want next. And that's a M&A game, not a internal creation game.
Generally speaking, you're right. I mean, I'm kind of surprised looking back that his goal to get into the metaverse didn't involve an acquisition of, say, a Roblox or something like that, and but rather to do it all by itself. And again, that hasn't worked all that well in the past necessarily for Facebook or Meta.
I saw an interesting chart this week. I hadn't seen it before. Somebody did some research and showed that the rate of layoffs in Silicon Valley or in tech has exceeded the national average of layoffs.
No
now,
doubt.
That could be taken two ways again. One of them is the tech industry is much more proactive on this stuff, and when they trim the sails, they trim the sails while the rest of American industry kind of hesitates to do it and all that. Or, they're in worse shape. I have a feeling now, I thought it was the second for a long time, but now I think it was the first, that Silicon Valley, they pull the trigger on this stuff fast nowadays.
They do, largely to please investors, but also what needs to go into that equation is how fast tech grew and hired during the pandemic. other industries that were not tech, that are not tech, were worried for, I think, the whole 2.5 year period. Hey, this might really hit us economically. Tech saw this just once in a generation opportunity to grow because everyone was home and streaming and using software and buying all this stuff. And it grew so fast that even all those layoffs have not brought these companies to their pre-pandemic hiring levels, but only to like a year ago levels or something. And so the rest of the industry didn't lay off as many people, but it didn't grow nearly as fast as tech did.
Yeah, they jumped in with both feet while the rest of the rest of the world hunkered down, which
Right.
is interesting insight into the personality of these companies. Okay, I was looking at the list of layoffs in March so far. The big ones, Atlassian just laid off 5% of its workforce, SiriusXM 8% of its workforce, Alerzo 15%, Waymo 8%. Then we go back a little bit to Twitter. Needless to say, quite a few, but they've had a second round of layoffs of about 100, 200 employees. And we're starting to see some companies actually having another round, like Meta's doing right now, but also Twilio. Twilio lost 17% of its workforce, 1,400 people. Is this going to keep going? I mean, we were wondering if it might begin to fade by now, but it looks like companies are still doing it. I mean, it's a lot of people.
I just, for each of those companies, I mean, we don't have enough time to do it right now, but I would say, how many people did they hire during the pandemic? And if the appetite for these products is back where it was in 2019, let's say, how do you keep that many more people, right? If you grew by 30% and you cut 10%, you still have a lot of extra workers that you didn't have 2.5 years ago. And so maybe you do need another round if you're finding that the appetite is going back to those 2019 levels. I think this sort of digital future that people talked about didn't turn out to be true, because lo and behold, we started to go back to the movie theater and the gym and restaurants. And I just don't think companies really knew, because how could we during the pandemic, where they were going. And now they're not sure where they've landed. For some companies, it's been a softer landing than others. But for some, I think investors are demanding even more cost cutting, and we may well see more in the future.
And these companies have grown despite all the layoffs. I'm reminded of when the dot-com bubble burst. Everyone said, oh, thousands of companies have shuttered, and this is going to be a massive setback for the internet and e-commerce and all that. And then, later on, we look back at the numbers, and that world, the world of internet commerce, didn't miss a step. It continued to grow. It had a shakeout, but it kept growing at that same pace all the way through good times and bad. So, and I sense that's what's going on now. Yeah, you grew 30%, you lay off 10%, but you've grown 20% in your workforce and probably 80% in your revenues and profits. So we're not going back to status quo ante. We've moved quite a bit ahead. And I think once the sun comes out again, I think we'll begin to realize that we're a lot further down the road than we thought we were.
Perhaps. And I think your example is a good one of, say, online commerce, because that wasn't just a fad that came and went. That is now the default for a lot of us and how we shop. And it's really part of our culture and part of our society. So yes, Amazon's stock price might rise and fall, and Meta's workforce might rise and fall, but these are things that are embedded in our lives, and they're not going away anytime soon, because we won't let them, even if they need to occasionally cut costs to keep their investors happy. It's an adage we hear over and over again, oh, Wall Street is not the economy. And I would always push back and say, but it's part of the economy. But the fact is, it's not that big a part of the economy, I'll admit. We do things based on what our lives have turned into, and we'll still do them no matter what these companies do to keep their investors happy.
Oh yeah, I look around my house and I see how many things I purchased during the lockdown that I'm, technology items, gadgets that I'm still using now.
Right.
I didn't abandon all that stuff. It's still here, and I'll be upgrading it in another year or so. Gardner Group did a survey, and they're wondering if the tech talent crunch is over. But they did a survey right at the end of last year. The numbers just coming in, and 73% of tech companies are still worried about not being able to find qualified information technology trained employees. There's still a talent crunch out there, which surprises me. You lay off 40,000 people. You think, well, we don't really need any new engineers for a little while, but apparently you still need good engineers no matter what.
Yeah, I'm actually less surprised by that. I think that makes sense. And it's not just because of the sheer numbers of engineers or QA people or tech writers or whatever. I think it's also because of the fast pace that technology moves forward and that these companies do. And I think you're going to find that for all of the Twitters that insist we can run this ship with 1/8 of the employees that we had, there are a lot of companies that really are trying to push the envelope, and they need skilled people to do that. And I understand that concern going forward. And I think that's going to be a real push, is these companies' desire to grow and move forward with talent, and their desire, at least the desire in the C-suite, to please investors by cutting costs. That's going to be a battle, I think, that these companies are going to fight within themselves.
Okay, there's new legislation coming out of the Assembly, California State Assembly. This one where I have two voices, the devil and the angel here. This is the workers, this is management, and investors and shareholders. This thing is called the WARN. They love these acronyms: the California Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, the WARN Act, and it would give employees 60 days notice if the company lays off more than 50 employees in a 30-day period. Sponsored by Matt Haney of San Francisco. It would also broaden the scope to encompass contract workers, which is interesting because California doesn't seem to want contract workers, but it's going to protect them who are not protected by the existing earlier WARN Act. I mean, what do you think? It protects the workforce. I mean, the quote from Haney is, "This bill is about protecting that workforce from the engineers to the janitors and making sure they're treated fairly during job transition. To be pro-tech, we have to be pro-tech worker." On the one hand, as we've been noting, one of the reasons the Valley is so successful and manages to return to health so quickly is because it's so willing to do quick layoffs. Simultaneously, you watch those poor kids walking out of Google, and we're already starting to hear complaints that some of these layoffs from companies are not as nice as we thought they were. What do you think?
I mean,
I find myself on both sides of the fence on this one. Protect the workers, but also keep the dynamic of business, or companies will behave differently. They might even be preemptively laying off people, even in good times, not to have to deal with these extra costs during downtime.
I mean, 60 days or whatever they decide is not that much of a preempt. They know how the numbers are going to go. And look, I'm not management or a shareholder. I come down on the side of the workers. I think that it's a humane thing to do. It puts the word out. Frankly, it's good for us reporters because of these WARN Act things. We know when a company is going, especially a public company, is going to announce layoffs. And I think it's good that the workers know. These are humane things that if we don't have something like this, I think unions will get an even stronger foothold in the tech industry. You look at some of the layoffs, and right, people weren't really shedding too many tears for Google workers because that's a highly paid staff. But
they got a good exit package. That's for sure.
They did. As awkward as it was for them to show up and find out that they didn't have a job because, and how did they find out? Because their card key didn't work. That's rough. That's really rough. It could have been done more humanely than that. Also, Twitter, they went on to log on one day and their screen was gray. That's no way to find out that the company you've given your time.
Exactly. There's precedent for that in the Valley. Even as far back as the 70s, Fairchild laid off a whole bunch of employees alphabetically over the loudspeaker.
Right. And
people sat huddling at their desks in fear, right, as it went through the A's and the B's and the C's and that sort of thing. So callous layoffs is not unprecedented around here.
Well, and look, the unions have been gradually gaining momentum in the Valley precisely because of that attitude that management has towards its workers. And I see that continuing unless and until they show these workers a little more decency, even as they give them good packages on the way out. And I'm impressed with, for the most part, the big companies and how they've done that, and that they've taken care of these workers, and in some cases, even found other jobs within the company.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting as these companies grow, how many hirebacks they'll do.
Right. And
that's the final chapter. Do they hire them all back? We'll see.
We'll see.
Okay, real quick. As we mentioned earlier, the Fed kind of admitted they blew it. I thought they were raising interest rates pretty fast, but now they were starting to cool off a little bit. Now they're saying, nah, inflation is still here. We gotta kill it. We're gonna start raising again at a faster rate. So we're back up to 0.75%, maybe 0.5%. I mean, Jerome Powell basically did a mea culpa. And so here we go. Maybe next week it begins.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. But that's the idea that we see more interest rate cuts has been around for a while. I don't think Powell ever said this is the last one. Even with the last smaller one, he said we're still likely to see more. It's just the size at this point and how fast they're trying to curb inflation and pull the brake on the economy. And it turns out a gradual pull of the brake wasn't really enough to slow things down all that much.
This is foot through the firewall breaking now.
Possibly so. But boy, we have a generation of people who are really not used to, I mean, look at your credit card rates right now. Look at the mortgage rates right now. They're as high as some of these people have known for an entire generation.
Oh, yeah. Especially credit card rates.
Right.
Mrs. Malone cut up most of our credit cards years ago. I really haven't been tracking the interest rates, but oh my God, they're high.
Yeah, when anyone either on the street or a news anchor says, "What do we do?" Because as these interest rates rise, is there anything we can do? And I say, look, it's not for me to assume that you have a bunch of cash lying around, but any cash you have, if you pay off those credit cards, you're going to get something like a 24% return on investment. There's no stock out there that's going to do that.
Yeah.
But if you can pay off that debt, it has just gotten so expensive because of these rate hikes that, I mean, it's always good to pay off debt, but it's really good when the interest rate is this high. You're just paying the bank for something you've owned already and may not even have anymore.
Yeah, and one of the early clues is when you start getting solicitations for new credit cards with high numbers on them. That's a sign. I started out getting letters. Would you like to get a new Visa card, new MasterCard? Now they're actually sending me cards that I can instantly use. It immediately goes in the trash because I've been down this road too many times.
When the banks like you, they like you for a reason.
We were talking about interest rates a few months ago and the secondary and tertiary effects. And one of them was mortgage rates started climbing. And I think it was not this week, last week, we hit a milestone, not a pleasant one. We crossed a threshold where now housing prices, list prices are actually gone higher than purchase prices. I have that backwards.
Right.
Purchase prices are lower than list prices. I mean, up until, even weeks ago, you see a house listed for $2 million. You go down the real estate table and it went for 2.1, 2.2. Now it's going for 1.95, 1.9. That's a psychological moment right there.
Right. It's a cold splash of water for Bay Area homeowners selling their house because now they're in the same boat as everybody else in the country, which is you ask something and you settle for a little lower. We haven't done that here in the Bay Area in a very long time. And the cold splash of water is that now that's the average. And who knows how long that will last. But people think about it, even with prices dropping from their recent highs, you may be paying less for that house, but when faced with a 7% mortgage, you start doing the math and you think, well, I'm not even going to match the list price. I'm going to have to go lower. And it's just such a slow market right now because there's very little inventory, but also people are a little freaked out about buying for those reasons we were just talking about.
Yeah, and so we're starting to see some of those old instruments for purchasing houses that try to get around some of this. During the big inflation bubble, during the Carter years, it was balloon payments. It was adjustables and balloon payments, and which all sounded good. It got you into a house, but then sitting down the road there was this time bomb, and it cost a lot of people their homes. So I would think people should be very wary about the situation right now. But I mean, it's interesting to see people listing their houses and everybody's coming in with a low ball number. I mean, when was the last time you saw that? Usually you listed your house and there were 20 people on the lawn bidding it up.
Well,
you just
right.
took the high.
Right. That's when mortgage rates were super low and everybody had a high paying job and the stock market was super high. I mean, right. Things will turn around. These things ebb and flow. But I think we're in an ebb for a little while because, like you say, people are just wary both of buying and even of selling right now.
And we just did an entire show without much technology, but it seems like this is the week to be talking about it. So one last item, technology, consumer technology. Ring just announced its new battery doorbell plus. Now it's battery powered, but the interesting part of it is it has a 150 degree by 150 degree aspect. So it's basically a huge fisheye lens that will get who's ever at the door from head to toe. And it will actually discern human beings from anything else. So I don't know what the implications of that are. I mean, Meta still only gives you half a person, but Ring, by golly, will let you see the shoes that your FedEx guy is wearing.
Yeah, I love this, as if somehow the person on the other end, if you're looking on your phone or whatever, isn't going to recognize that it's a person. Like, if it's a delivery person or a guest that's knocking on your door or ringing your bell, you're going to think, is that an animal? Is it a human being?
Oh, look, they have legs. I'll answer the door.
It's not the metaverse. They have legs. And by the way, anything plus to me means a streaming service. So I assume we can also stream, Top Gun on this as well through our Ring doorbell. So good for them.
Stand by the door and watch a movie.
Yes.
Okay, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Have a great weekend. And if you're in Northern California, put on your ring gear, folks. Here it comes again. Bye-bye.